Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Brown & Brown Distinguished Speaker Series featuring Lara Sweet. By joining this webinar, you may have the opportunity to interact with our presenter and our moderator in the Q&A box in your Zoom screen, which will be checked throughout the presentation. Our moderator will scan audience questions as the conversation continues. If you have any questions or concerns during this webinar, please send a direct chat message to me, Katie Park Screen, during the event. Again, thank you for joining us. I would like to kick off today's event by introducing our School of Business Dean, Professor Maury Peiperl. Dean Peiperl, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Katie. Welcome to everyone. Appreciate your joining us this afternoon. This is going to be a very interesting conversation about some issues that are relevant to all of us, I have to say. I want to thank, by way of beginning, I want to thank Brown & Brown Insurance, which has been sponsoring for the last 12 years, quite incredible, this initiative to bring together academia and the community and enrich the educational experience of our School of Business students, our faculty, our alumni, our staff, and our friends, and helping us build and strengthen our relationships with the business community in and around the region. So thank you. We're really fortunate that this Brown & Brown Distinguished Speaker Series brings together a group of quite diverse corporate leaders, government officials, and others to dig into those key issues that we all face as business and organization leaders, whether in the public, private, or not-for-profit sector. Things about how we do better, how we take care of the issues, how we address our nation's ability to sustain and enhance its competitive edge, and also the support of its workforce from the most junior to the most senior. And to that end, I'm particularly pleased to be welcoming back one of our alumni, Lara Sweet from the class of '96, alumna from accounting actually, but she at the moment is the Chief People Officer at Snap, but we're going to have a specific introduction for Lara in a moment. I want to thank her for coming back and for joining us, and I would like to not only thank Brown & Brown, but introduce Kathleen Kohler, who's the Business Development and Sales Executive there, to welcome our speaker today. And Kathleen, many, many thanks to you and to the company for your longstanding and significant support.
Well, thank you, Dean Peiperl. I appreciate that. And welcome to all of our virtual guests today. I am very pleased to be part of this distinguished speaker series with partnership that we've had between Brown & Brown and George Mason's School of Business. We've had this partnership now since 2008, as Maury has mentioned. So thrilled to be here today and very happy to introduce our speaker. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Brown & Brown, who we are, what we do. We are a national brokerage firm, insurance brokerage firm, and we work with businesses and families all across the country to provide business insurance solutions, employee benefit platforms, and we also work with families for personal lines insurance as well. So this speaker series really, it supports our mission to bring knowledge and expertise to both the current and the future business leaders of our community. So we're very happy to be here today. And at this time, I would like to introduce to you guys Lara Sweet, who is the Chief People Officer for Snap Incorporated, which is the parent company of Snapchat. As Chief People Officer, Lara is responsible for managing talent and supporting a strong company culture by overseeing recruiting, talent management, benefits and compensation, diversity and inclusion, and workplace service teams. Ms. Sweet has served as Snap's interim Chief Financial Officer from January 2019 to May 2019, and as Chief Accounting Officer from October 2017 to September 2019, where she was responsible for leading the global accounting, financial reporting, shared service, and financial operations process. Previous to that role, she served as the controller in June of 2016, joining Snap to really build out the accounting function and to prepare them for their IPO. And from November 2014, this is quite a resume, by the way, guys, to 2016, Ms. Sweet served as the controller and the chief accounting officer for AOL Incorporated, and previously served as vice president, internal audit from April 2014 to November 2014, and vice president, assistant controller from August 2011 to April 2014. Prior to her time at AOL, Ms. Sweet led audit, accounting, and external reporting functions in the financial services, travel, and hospitality industries. She graduated from George Mason University in 1996 with a BS degree in accounting and as a licensed CPA. That is quite a resume. Welcome, Lara. We are really happy to have you here today, this afternoon. And I will let you and Dean settle in for your fireside chat. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm really, really excited to be here today. And for those of you that may not know, I was actually really looking forward to, I guess it must have been 2020. I was supposed to come out there to be in person, and then the pandemic shut down travel and I wasn't able to do it. So I'm really excited that we can do this in person. And I look forward to the opportunity to get back out to Virginia and visit the campus at a point in the near future, fingers crossed. But maybe just a little bit about my journey as a quick introduction before we get into this wonderful conversation. And Dean Peiperl, I'm so excited that you're helping to moderate this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. And as I mentioned, let me tell you just a little bit about, some pivotal points in my career journey, and I'm going to focus them specifically on my time at Mason. So one, my father actually graduated from George Mason University as well. So he was super proud when his daughter decided to go to school there. But when I went to start off my college experience, I had a real passion for the arts, but I was missing a critical ingredient, which was talent for the arts. And so I went into school thinking, okay, I'm going to need to have a more practical degree based on, what I knew my skill sets were. So I went into the School of Business and of course was doing some of my, early elective studies. And I remember sitting down, one of my early classes when I was in the School of Business was with Professor Blanchard. And he was my first accounting professor. And I remember sitting in this class, Accounting 101, and being like, numbers and business. Now this is something I can do. And I made a decision and during that class to become an accounting major. And so get my accounting degree, excuse me. And then it kind of goes forward a little bit and I'm getting into like near graduation. And I got the honor to get to work with Professor Buchanan for a couple of my classes. And it was really fascinating because it was in those classes that he started having conversations about preparing us for life after school. And that's when I became aware of like, okay, what are some of the different career paths? And through him, actually became aware of Beta Alpha Psi, and I joined the accounting honors fraternity at Mason and started networking with different schools and really kind of exploring different schools, different employers and figuring out, well, what could I do? And it was because of that experience of, really having great teachers like Professor Blanchard and Professor Buchanan, as well as many, many other professors in my experience, but then also, having the opportunity to join Beta Alpha Psi, that I was in an interview with a local accounting firm. And it was the first moment that was really key to how I approached my career. I remember sitting down and I ended up joining Beers and Cutler, which is now a part of Baker Tilly. And it was an option to say I could go in and I didn't have to choose accounting or audit or tax. I could explore both. And I remember early on thinking, I really like to explore different things. I like to understand the world that I'm entering into, really figuring things out and then making decisions. And that's actually kind of framed my career mindset every step forward, which I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to get into. But I think that I had some really formative moments during my time at Mason that set me up with a mental framework for how I would approach different industries and, as the intro states, even different shifts in my career function from finance to the people function that I think started right here in Mason. So thank you.
Well, this is super because I had an interest in this. I was going to ask you this anyway. You went there, and we already have a question on it. So this point about going from accounting to chief people officer, but I think what I hear you saying is it's not a sort of a from to. it's seeing the big picture, connecting the dots, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm really interested in that aspect of your professional journey, because it's something to which we as a school also aspire on behalf of our students. So you want to maybe say a little bit more about that? We have this idea that in some companies, in fact, in our organization, you know, the CHRO, Chief HR Officer, reports to the CFO. Sometimes that seems to work great. It seems to for us, but other times it's, well, what's the connection? And you've not only been in different structures, you've done those different roles. So maybe just a little bit about how those things function in your experience, you know, in your roles, your companies.
Sure. Well, maybe let me step back to that point and just explain a little bit about the Chief People Officer role at Snap, and then, you know, a little bit about how I got there, because it is that kind of thinking about things more broadly that I think got me to this place. So one, the Chief People Officer at Snap, if you think about it, is really responsible for hiring, retaining, and inspiring the talent at Snap. And so it's something that's really, really important to us. Talent is a critical component of our business. I report directly into our Chief Executive Officer. To your point, it can sometimes report into the CFO. At our organization, we prefer a framework where, you know, we have a very, you know, peer team oriented executive team structure. And so, you know, I'm peers with the CFO. We partner very, very closely. I'm sure he appreciates that I understand how accruals work and how spending happens. But it's critically important because of how much emphasis we put on helping and supporting not only the talent that's at our company, but creating accessibility to tech more broadly, which we could talk about a bit more later. You know, for me specifically, as I reflect back on my career and I think about how did I make different moves throughout my career and how did that play into where I am now, I've always been a very curious problem solver. And, you know, it doesn't have to be something broken. It could just be a challenge, something yet to be solved, or it could sometimes be something that needs to change and adapt to, you know, the next iteration of a business or the world or talent, et cetera. And so as I look back, each of the roles that I was in was either creating or redesigning something. So when I got out of school and I went into public accounting, I got a really good chance to, you know, work with a lot of different clients. And I realized I cared a lot about getting into an organization and helping to build things that last. And so that's what pivoted me from public accounting into my first role, which was around the time of Sarbanes-Oxley rolling out. And so I joined Marriott to help them get ready for that transition. And then, you know, as you kind of go forward, I then helped my next company that became newly standalone public. They had to be ready for Sarbanes-Oxley. So I'm like, okay, let me build you that structure. And then, you know, I happened to, it's kind of funny, as an internal auditor in that role, it's like, you know, I think that you're missing a couple of roles on your external reporting side because you've got a lot of things funneling through the same person. That's probably a segregation of duties challenge, not an issue, but a challenge. I was like, great idea. Would you like to be that person? And that's how I turned into a focus on SEC reporting. But I found like I just kept having these moments of seeing something kind of either happening to get involved or being asked to get involved and getting this reputation for, you know, Lara will roll up her sleeves, cares deeply about the client experience, whether that's an internal client or an external customer. And I guess I got a reputation for being able to build things or retrofit things for the future. And that just kept bringing my name up in future iterations. Fast forward to I'm at Snap and I went through the IPO process with Snap, which was an amazing experience, helped to set up the accounting team. And I joked, maybe I wasn't a great accountant, but I knew how to build great accounting teams. And that led to, you know, conversations ultimately when we were looking for our permanent CFO. I remember saying, how can I best serve the business? And I thought, I know we can find a great CFO. We actually found somebody else who was in the company, which was amazing. But I said, it's going to be really hard for us to find somebody from the outside who knows our business, knows our culture, and has this operational mindset to get us, you know, from where we were to where we're going next. I said, how about I do it? And because I had this reputation of like being a good listener, caring about my stakeholders, and, you know, getting stuff done candidly, we said, yes, let's do it. And that's how I ended up in the people role. And I think that you're right. It's because I shifted from beyond, this is my functional role and I will do exactly my functional role, and really thought about how do I help the businesses I'm in move forward, that you end up being able to take that type of a skill and adapt it in a couple different ways.
Oh, that's great. We certainly believe in that, try to teach that. And we have a number of people, certainly in the school, as well as alumni, like yourself, not all as successful as yourself, but who have moved across not just companies and geographies, but functions, not because they give up on one, but because they get the connection to the next one. And it's great to hear you describing this, because I've always advocated for the T person, the one who has breadth as well as depth. So in these transitions that you've had, in particular, let's say across companies, anything that was a specific kind of draw for you to take on a new opportunity? I hear the role kind of function piece. What about the company piece, or changing industries and things like that?
It's really interesting because this is a great segue to even how I think people are really approaching companies more and more often these days. For me, it was, I had to be excited about what I was going to be doing. And in some cases, it's a tough decision on keep going with what you're doing or move to the next things. A lot of times I thought, have I built a team that can continue? And so me moving on is I'm leaving them in great shape with a great succession plan, a great bench of talent, and now I'll go help this next opportunity. From that standpoint, when I think about that excitement of role, I then had to be excited about what the company was trying to do. So whether that was the mission, whether that was the product, or whether that was the value system that they had embedded in their culture, I always had to have those ingredients, because it's, I always thought, even if it was moments in time, I was always looking for like a career family. I always took you spend a lot of time with the people you work with. And it was deeply important to me that, especially as somebody who went through the CPA process, that my integrity and my ethics is incredibly important to me. And so I always looked to make sure there was alignment with that. So it was excitement about what I could do, what I could help them with, confidence that the team I was leaving behind was in great shape, and on values and mission alignment with what the company was doing.
Now that makes a lot of sense. So talk a little bit about your current position at Snap. You gave us some of the history and the different functions that you've served there. What are your kind of main goals and priorities now as Chief People Officer, looking broadly?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really evolved, I would say, even over the past year plus now. So one, when I step back, at the core of it is we want to bring in amazing talent to the company. We want to make sure that we're growing and developing them so that they choose to stay and continue to evolve their careers with us. And we want to inspire them to really unlock their fullest potential. But one of the strategic objectives in our company that I've been most proud of is that we strive to be a force for good in the world. And so really, thinking about how can we actually had a speaker join us recently that talked about how you could be a good ancestor. And so we care deeply about not just what we're doing in the short term with our product and our business, but what we're doing in the long term. And sometimes the long term is maybe a 2-year goal. A lot of times it's a 10-year goal. Sometimes it's a 100-year goal. And I think that that's really important when I think about my role is I want to help support the team and having that long-term orientation. And so we do that a couple of ways. One, for those that may not know, our values are, we are kind, we are smart, we are creative. You could think those sound great, but what exactly do they mean? We actually went through a process of codifying them at our organization by explaining, this is what we mean by kind, this is what we mean by smart, this is what we mean by creative. This is how they show up in behavioral attributes, so people could really understand what it does and doesn't look like. But then we went a step further, and we've taken our values and we've embedded them into our performance management and therefore our compensation. So we said, it's great if people drive impact, that's really important, but they have to also be living our values, because what we do is very important, but how we do it is critically important. And so I think when you do that, a couple of things happen. One, you really put your money where your mouth is in terms of your values and not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. But also, as a lot of people are thinking of joining or staying at an organization, they're asking, like, what type of a company are you doing? What are you doing besides your product? What's your, social responsibility? Like, what's your impact in the world? And so we don't think about those things because candidates, for example, want us to. We think about those things because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's a great draw for talent. But then, I think broadly to thinking about how I want to kind of care for opportunities for individuals, and I is definitely a we at our organization, but just speaking personally, is how do we create better paths so that more and more people can access tech? Tech is a really great opportunity for, people to get into a workforce that is just, growing and has more and more job opportunities. And we want to think about what are the ways that we can provide, even earlier education opportunities so that more people can get into tech. When we think about our job descriptions, we're thinking about what is adjacent talent to versus what somebody might be used to for a role, what other skills might be able to do that same job. So we're really accessing greater talent. And I'd say in 2020, we learned two really important things that stand out to me the most. One is talent doesn't need to be geo-specific. So what that means is in this new world where we've proven how effective remote can be, we can access talent that may not be as close to some of our offices as they would have pre-COVID. And so that's a really great opportunity for a more inclusive culture, a more equitable culture, and greater access to a broader talent pool. But then also within our organization, we've really thought about, do we truly understand candidly what it means to build a more fair, more inclusive, and truly anti-racist culture where we're creating opportunities for all and trying to deeply explore what are some of the systemic barriers that might have been built from an incredibly well-intentioned place, but might be introducing bias to the system that we don't want. And so how do we facilitate really courageous conversations from all of our team members so we can understand the different lived experiences of our team members and build a culture that actually lifts all of us.
Yeah, no, it's great. In fact, most organizations now, certainly in this country, are trying to understand how to better do this. But I think you nailed it. It is about the understanding the lived experience of each of the persons, right? And it's going to be different. You're never going to be able to predict it. You're never going to be able to know it all. You have to kind of ask and listen and convene those conversations. I have to say, though, Lara, by the way, a couple of minutes ago, you're talking about the long term, which I think is brilliant. And I think it's just wonderfully ironic, and you've probably heard this before, that the company that made it big on the very short transient experience to the user is the one that is all about the longer term. It's beautiful. Just as a great juxtaposition.
And I'm happy because there's even a connection to that, which is part of the concept behind ephemerality of our product, and even like short form, is if you think about like the ephemerality, like the chats disappear, for example, or memories and snaps disappear if you don't practically say them. It's very similar to like, you don't record all of the conversations you have with your friends.
Exactly.
And so we wanted to really replicate that true experience with real friends. And similarly, around the content experience, we're trying to make that more about understanding, curating to people's experiences in ways that they can consume like in the moment.
Yeah, no, it's great. I do have a question that you maybe you'll be willing to go a little bit deeper on what you just said about folding values and the behaviors associated with them into performance evaluation. And of course, the person is wondering, what does that look like? There's a particular kind of evidence that you look for. How do you do that? I think many of us struggle with that.
Well, so maybe this, you'll laugh, this has a little bit of a finance flair to it, but maybe not exactly. We actually have created a tool that our performance management, like many performance management systems, does have a scoring model. So there is kind of the I'll put it in its simplest form, which is not exactly how ours work, but like, let's say a 1 through 5 score. So if somebody is delivering impact, which would be measured by the goals that were set for the year and the objectives and key results that need to happen, they could get, let's say, a high impact score. But then if you look at the measurement of our values, so this is based on an X and Y axis, And then if you think of the measurement of our values, if somebody is not living our values, so let's say they're not being kind, they're not being smart, they're not being creative, and that's, we've got actual definitions of what that means, they will then actually bring their overall score down, and therefore their compensation on lockdown.
And
Sorry, it
does
looks
it-
like you have a question there.
No, that's really good. No, I'm just wondering, does that data come from 360? I mean, you want to?
Oh, got it. So we,
No, that's
yeah.
me. I'm adding to the audience.
No, that's a great point. So if you step back to the beginning of the process, it is at the very beginning of any of our evaluation cycles, we should be setting objectives for teams that can actually measure what we expect them to do. And then when we get to the actual performance cycle, first and foremost, which I think is a really, really important thing, we expect people to not be holding their feedback until the feedback process.
Right.
It should be given real time and in the
Absolutely.
moment, which is so important.
Yeah.
And we really try to encourage as many one-on-one conversations as we can versus like, oh, you know, told the boss, but never told the person type thing. So we're trying to create more trust in the organization, but then it goes through a pretty standard process of people select feedback providers. So I would select feedback providers on my behalf, but then my boss also gets the opportunity to add some people. Just, you know, let's say I picked all my favorite friends, they'd have an opportunity to pick a couple additional people. And then that is, we require that to be a multi-level process.
Great.
Of people you work with, people who you work for, and people who work for you.
Oh, congratulations. No, I admit I wrote my PhD on the topic of 360-degree feedback. So it's always interesting to hear, you know, how you put it into practice with substance, right? And consistency and fairness. It sounds like you've really done it. Well, look, I mean, we've kind of danced around this topic of, you know, workforce and the ambitions that people have in work, but also the way that they like to see companies, you know, manifesting values, et cetera, what they're looking for. So you've been at this a while from a number of different angles, a number of different companies. I'm curious how you think the shape of the workforce is changing, both recently and then also now, given the particular shakeup in the last year.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because there's a couple of things that, you know, it's funny, I laugh. Why did it take us all going remote to, like, for me personally, to be like, wow, why didn't I think about that sooner? One, you know, this is not one of those learnings, but I did start off with what is incredibly important to us. And we find is more and more important as we're having conversations with candidates that would, you know, consider an opportunity at Snap, is values alignment. So believing in the product, understanding and caring about what our vision is from a product orientation, but then also deeply aligned with our values. They care about it and we care about it deeply. We find that that's a great unlock for success at our organization. But then, you know, some things that we've learned recently that really stand out to me is, while there was a lot of really, really significant challenges that faced so many people and impacted everybody during this pandemic in different ways, and some more than others, what we learned from a business just taking this straight to remote was that we could be highly effective not in the office. And that actually created a really, you know, interesting opportunity where people were, for example, you know, they didn't have the commute time, they could get to dinner with their families more easily, or various other things, while still maintaining a high level of productivity. So what we've really taken is this approach to, we employ high judgment people who we trust, and let's not unwind this when we get the opportunity to all get back together. Let's leverage, like, a lot of this has worked well, and let's maintain that flexibility for our team and for future team members. But then for the things we really miss, let's curate to those. And what that means is, we miss the serendipitous moments. We miss the bumping into each other in the hallway. And so, like, how can we curate those moments, both virtually and in person? And that's been really important, not only to our team, but we hear it, as I mentioned, from recruits, like, what's your approach to this? Will you make me come into an office all the time? And so I think we're really excited. We're an innovative company. We're excited to experiment and learn as we all go through this together. The other things that just were incredibly important is, as I mentioned, this wasn't easy on a lot of people, and mental well-being just became a very, very big topic. We were already providing services through our benefits program to enhance mental well-being and support it, but it just I don't know where we would have been without those benefits during this difficult time. And our culture came back into play because we need to think about each other. And when you're not in a room, you don't walk by somebody's office or their desk and see that they're stressed. So how do you check in on each other? How do you care? And then similarly, how do you raise your awareness to be more inclusive? And we found creating new channels for communication actually drove a lot of those opportunities. Our leadership team group started a weekly series where we would answer any question that the team asked. And that created an openness to dialogue that then actually allowed for more courageous conversations around what was happening in the world and the experiences of our team member, that then, coming back to my role, fed a lot of information to me on how I could support the teams as we went through this together.
It makes a lot of sense. The culture part has always been essential, although not always necessarily recognized as such. But now when you can't perpetuate it in the normal way, I think it rises to a level of prominence that people see because they miss it.
Yes.
And this is something, we've got a couple of questions here related to this. Actually, a couple of questions from our colleague Cindy Parker, who's an HR professor and expert. Well, what do you?
I feel like this is going to be a pop quiz.
It's okay. I can help you with this. I'm also an HR professor. No, what are you doing to keep that culture strong? During this time of distributed work, remote work, and of course there are tremendous advantages to those things. You were pointing out some. How do you keep that culture together? And then there's another one about culture and candidates, but let me come to that in a moment.
Sure. I think that we try to be really, really intentional about it. And one of the things that I've often been concerned about, and especially is there's a lot of people who've been onboarded to our organization, having never met anyone from the team. It's like, how long are we going to be drafting off the relationships that we built when we were together?
We have a new president like that in Ed Mason.
It's a significant challenge. And so we've done a couple of things is, one, it goes back to really caring about each other and the relationships that we built. So for each of us, there's this reminder, we kind of hold ourselves accountable to who have you not talked to in a while? Like, who have you not checked in with? We try to create these, it's challenging in this virtual world, but these like serendipitous moment opportunities, whether it's, open office hours, open coffee talk hours, all of these pretty, relatively easy lift things where we just make ourselves available, not just as a leadership team, but I see it happen across organizations. There's been a much higher uptick of, I mentioned our all hands where the executives will answer any questions, but leaders are also doing a lot more frequent all hands and being mindful to not make it just information flow out, but leaving time for responses back in. So there's I found a richer cadence between our leadership teams and the rest of the overall organization. The other part that has really stood out to me is you've heard me mention these courageous conversations a couple of times. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion team is actually called the IDEA team, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Awareness, because of the critical importance that is not just about understanding, for example, what may be equitable, but understanding and becoming more aware of the experiences of others. And so we created a series called The Big Idea, where it is, courageous conversations where people of different lived experiences, whether it is, gender or, different, racial backgrounds or even disability or mental well-being, and just having the opportunities for people to share their experiences. So more in the organization it's not wrong for people to not be aware because their own lived experience might be narrower, but we're really encouraging people to broaden that view, not only from joining moments like The Big Idea, as I mentioned, but also, candidly, we've been providing a lot of literature because it's not also on, let's say, somebody like me to go to somebody who's not like me and say, teach me. So we've provided a lot of resources like how can you educate yourself? How can you raise your own awareness? And I think that's been really important for our culture because it starts to weave us together and realize not only what makes us different, but what makes us alike. And so we become more of a strong, well-aligned organization. And I found it's just been really, really powerful for our culture. And then just little things on, how we're trying to help people everybody's working really hard right now. We found productivity has gone way up, and part of that, my guess is, people don't have a lot of other options. And that's hard. And so we try to think about, like, how do we release some of the pressure? There's power in having the same time off all at the same time, so people can actually practice some self-care and take care of themselves and recharge their batteries. So I could go on and on, but
No, this is great. And I think many of us are trying to figure out how to do those pieces. Really, really important. Just to our friends that have joined us this afternoon, and thank you for being here, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat for the questions, if you would, please. And we're getting a few. I did mention there's one that has to do with culture and values, and of course, job candidates. You won't be surprised to know a number of students in the audience are wondering. I mean, if we just get to the very blatant question, I want to work for you, how do I get hired? But I could also mention it the way that another person has phrased it, which is, if we want to become successful in big tech or in related companies, what is it that we should most be focusing on? What helps people to stand out? Is there something about the certain young professionals that are more or less attractive? And then back to Cindy's related question, which is, what strategies do you use to measure that fit? You talk about fit, you've talked about data, and I'm just curious, not just for the student's sake, although that's of course important, very important to us, but from the point of view of the CHRO who's trying to kind of build the culture in the future. Any particular things that you focus on?
yeah, and so maybe I can go into a little bit of well, I'll start with some of the things that I believe are successful in tech, but it does vary by company. And so this is not a one size fits all answer. The things that have resonated me most, and maybe I'll just speak a bit more specifically about, Snap, is, obviously there's technical qualifications for a role. So like, can somebody actually do the job function that is required? And we try to be open-minded to think about, like, okay, is there more than one way we can think about that? So that's something we challenge ourselves with. But then when I think about candidates, some of the things that really stand out for me, and this will then segue nicely into how we kind of measure our values specifically, is I look for, how are they thinking? One, obviously, if you're going to interview at a company, do a little bit of homework on the company, be able to speak about the product. And usually I like to hear, or maybe even the role in the team, a connection to how you may be passionate about what the company is doing. I always find that's a really just a good tip in general, because a lot of times people are trying to figure out, like, okay, like, do you believe in it as much as we believe in it? And that's, not a requirement, but it is a really important factor. Other things that I like to see is, for me, especially as I think about maybe individuals who might be starting out their career in the earlier stage, curiosity and insatiable learning really stand out to me. And it's coming from a place of wanting to figure things out, being passionate about, like, how do you make things better? And we also like this mindset of, how do we do it as a team? We are a heavily team-oriented and collaborative culture. And so, a lot of we versus I thinking, I think, stands out. And of course, you're always looking for a bit of strategic mindset. So somebody who has had an idea, and how did you take steps to bring that idea to life? Because especially in a lot of tech orgs, there's innovation and experimentation. And I think that plays into curiosity. So this is not a perfect answer of how to get a job at Snap, but I think there are just some attributes that, when you think about somebody who's joining an organization, is you're thinking about, like, will they care about the team they're joining? Will they care about the product we're building? Will they be able to kind of grow and develop because their mindset is open? Like, these are things that are just, I think, good things to know. Underneath our values, maybe to get to how we measure it, I already said impact, we measure based on achievement of preset objectives. And so that's pretty much, did you do it? Did you not? If you didn't, was there a mitigating circumstance that impacted that was not in your control? And so, we think about that. But on the values, we've actually, when I said we've defined, we partnered with a third-party organization to really get into definitional attributes that have been tested by people who study, especially like organizational behavioral attributes. And we defined kind, smart, and creative. And so we picked 3 dimensions of behavioral attributes under each of our values. And then for each of those 3 dimensions, so 9 in total, we then share out with our whole organization, what does overuse or underuse look like? What does competency look like? And what does mastery look like? And we define and give examples like, this is what overuse looks like. This is what underuse looks like. So then when our managers, we of course then train our managers on how to use the system and how to apply these. We have HR people who then sit in on those evaluations to, hey, are you thinking about this right? Maybe, you said this for this person, but not for this person. Like, you need to be consistent. But it creates a framework where our people managers are able to kind of look at that and say, okay, this is how this person shows up consistently. Oh, that fits in with mastery. And then that will unlock a certain score. And then of course, on the back end, for those of you who've mentioned you do a lot of studies in HR, organizational behavior and design, we look just to make sure there's consistency in how our teams are applying that to try to make sure there's not any inadvertent bias or adverse impact.
No, that's really great. And I just want to check because you had a question on this. You're applying that as consistently as you can. You apply it to recruiting, you apply it, you said, to appraisals, and the person just wants to be sure you're actually using this also in things like salary decisions, bonuses, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really important differentiation because we have applied it to our performance management system, and that's fully rolled out. The next stage that we are rolling out is actually behavioral based interview framework, so that there's a consistent use of similar questions aligned to our values that our interviewers can use, and then training our interviews to make sure that they're using it. And then what's another really important part when you think about potential bias in the system is you may use a framework, but how you then interpret it and make a decision on an individual afterwards, a lot of bias could possibly creep in. So we've in this, as I mentioned, we're rolling this out more consistently from a candidate standpoint. So this one's kind of in flight, but also training people on how to debrief after interviews of like, okay, you asked this question, you got this answer. Have you now analyzed it, or if you got insufficient information based on that answer, how do we make sure that conclusions aren't being reached?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And it's for most organizations, this is a journey. This is not, you achieve a state of being and all's good. I have never seen that.
Nothing stays still.
Exactly. No, that's really great. There are a number of questions, and I know that you, if I understand correctly, we're planning also to talk about the current environment, the social environment.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about how the shape of the workforce is changing, but what's also very clear is that what's happening in our world is changing some of how we look at work, how we look at individuals, et cetera. So going back to your team that you referred to as the IDEA team, the question says, how do you create safe space for people to share their personal stories in these discussions, courageous conversation discussions? Are they pre-planned? Do you plan them in advance? And sort of how do you make are they big groups, small groups, and what kind of participation do you get? So that's the one kind of tactical piece there. And then bigger side of that is, how do you as a company tackle the social issues of our time? How do you respond to recent events affecting the Asian community? How do you put the kind of day-to-day company work together with the context of the society? I have a feeling you probably, being a big picture person, you probably muse about that sort of thing pretty often.
Well, I think, there's a lot of dimensions to that, maybe stepping back to how do we create a foundation for which people can have some of the conversations. So, even pre-COVID, like many companies, we had a program to teach, unconscious bias, like where does it show up and how do you do it? How do you understand it? But one of the things that I was really proud that we evolved was, even as somebody, this was before I was in the people role, took those courses. I'm like, okay, I may understand bias. Now, what do we do about it? And so we then pivoted to the next form of the training, which was allyship training, which was more about like, how do you show up as a better advocate and ally to others of various demographics? And so that was, also something that we kicked off and pre-COVID. And so I think that started to create a foundation that people could at least come to the conversation. And I think that was really important for when we then started, as I mentioned, things like, let me step back. We also have a practice at SNAP where we create opportunities for teams to come together. It's either, random pairings of people across the company so we can, better interact with each other, or sometimes it's team-based, but we create these opportunities for people to speak and listen from the heart, which effectively means that we have an opportunity for somebody to share, but it's not truly conversational. Like you get a chance to kind of witness and react to it, but it's for people to be able to share their experience. So because we've done that at SNAP since the beginning, there was already this storytelling, similar to storytelling in the app itself, the platform, where we saw the power in people being able to tell their story in a safe way. So when we did the big idea to like, how did we do it? It is a put on production where members of our idea team actually work with members of our team who want to share their stories. And when we were still in person, they would actually come to a stage and we would stream it to the rest of the company and they would share their stories. And then at the end, we'd open it up to a Q&A. When we shifted to COVID, it became more pre-filming of people's stories and experiences. And then on, we use Google Meet, but like in Google Meet, we would open it up to Q&A. And we found that, because that's why I called it Courageous Conversations, the first series, it had to be pretty scary for people to stand up and tell their story. And we didn't moderate their stories. We let it be their stories as raw as they really were. And we found that what was fascinating, what happened in our company, and I won't say it happens with everybody, it's a journey, but a lot of people have extrinsic motivation. They know what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
These conversations shifted a lot of people to intrinsic motivation. Like for me personally, I heard some of these stories and it cracked open, not only, my head was there, my heart got into it in a fundamentally different way. And it motivated a series of changes for me personally, as well as others of our leadership team and throughout our organization to better educate ourselves and be better allies and better understand other people's lived experiences. And I think that's where we then had opportunities to meet with people from various groups, including marginalized groups, for them to tell us what would be impactful for them. Instead of us telling them, like we certainly had ideas, but we created these conversational opportunities, which actually formed so most tech companies have objectives and key results. We have DEI objectives and key results as well, where we as a leadership team are held accountable for actions that we're committed to. And we've actually tied it to a component of our executive compensation. And so we're really saying like, we mean it, we're in this with you. And then to one thing that you mentioned at the end, and then maybe I'll round out because I can go into this for quite a while, is sometimes just acknowledging it, just helping people to feel seen and heard. Like when, the anti-Asian hate crimes that have been going on in the world were happening, like we acknowledge that, we spoke about it, we sent a message to the team, we showed how we can support each other. We recommended all people managers like, hey, you have team members who might need some space right now and some support, give it to them. And so I think there's just those things in addition to thinking about broad systemic, support systems and opportunities to help them advance their careers, to just showing up and being there and standing with others. That we're not perfect. Like many, we have a long way to go, but I think that, we're coming from a place where the conversations are happening so we can actually drive meaningful change, hopefully some of the short term, but a lot of it will hopefully yield benefit to even future generations. And I guess maybe just to round it out, because you're hitting something I'm really passionate about, is we then stepped back and thought, what can we do to make a difference? So for example, we implemented a living wage, which is, anybody joining our organization, the lowest amount of pay for any role at our organization, any full-time role is $70,000. And then we also provide an equity stake on top of that so they can grow wealth with the company. And of course, that'll be geo-differentiated based on different countries. But it was our commitment to making it easier for those who want to join our company to be able to do so. And then we thought about how do we support people who might be, trying to build a family, and we changed our paid parental leave to be 16 weeks, whether you are a mother, a father, a surrogate, adopting, etc., to really try to think about each of our policies from a more inclusive landscape. And so we just kept thinking about things like that. How can we make it easier? How can we be more inclusive? And created a healthy feedback loop for our organization to then say, yeah, that worked. No, that didn't. And iterating.
That is great. That's fabulous. Do I also understand you have some commitments around representation goals in the people in the company?
Yes. So in about July of last year, we did our first diversity annual report, where we made commitment to double the number of women in tech by 2023 at Snap, and to double the representation of underrepresented minorities at Snap by 2025. And broadly, our aspirational goal is that our workforce actually represents the communities that we're in. And so I would say for our first diversity annual report, that was kind of a starting point where we're actually working on our next diversity annual report right now, where we're thinking about how can we push those goals further. And so in setting those, we've then stepped back and thought about, okay, where it's challenging, what are the things that we need to do, whether that is we've implemented more coaching programs, not just for our most senior leadership, but for a lot of people at our organization, more mentoring programs, thinking about development in new ways. We're actually investing in our ERG employee resource groups, where we're taking them through leadership training programs. We are, supporting and rewarding the work that they do with us. And so, we're thinking about what makes a difference so that, in growing these numbers, we are an employer brand that really resonates with a wide variety of people. And then when they're here, they feel invested in such that they want to stay.
And I'm guessing that you, as the Chief People Officer, have not had a huge amount of pushback to making those changes, or have you?
No. There's always have we thought about this right? What about this? So there's debate about what we do, but there's not debate on should we do it.
On the why.
And I think many companies, there's always, you could do so many things if finances were limitless. And so we're always thinking about okay, what can we support? What can we make sure we stay committed to? And of, a long list of things we can do, what is most impactful those who need it, and make those type of debates and make sure the thing then that we implement delivers the most impact as well. So I love being part of the team where we are about it's the right thing to do. How do we do it well?
That's great. But let's talk for a moment back to the recruitment side, but on a slightly different topic. And I say this now, being in higher education, worrying as every industry is about what's our future, how do we chart it, et cetera. There's a question here that says, what about students who come right out of high school into tech and get reasonably high salaries? The questioner did not ask this, but I'm going to add this. Do colleges need to, pack up and go home? I mean, how do you see how you handle this change?
I think every organization, whether that is education, in the corporate side, we always have to evolve and iterate with the changes in the workforce. I think there's a very important place for colleges and universities in, educating. Yes. I know I've heard things hey, do we even need them anymore? I think, yes, I think we need more ways of educating people and making sure, for example, even going into high school, how do we make sure that there's not this significant drop off in people who are going into, computer science classes? Because there's a massive drop off, I think, around 8th grade. And so how do we prevent those things which then, if you think about access to tech, then that creates more and more demand and more programs that will happen at the college level, even at, apprenticeships, internships, alternate forms of curriculum. And when I say alternate forms of curriculum, I'm thinking about things where, various tech organizations are thinking about like, how can they help like support with like, these are the skills that are important to our organization, and really, I would say, augment and enhance what people are getting at their degrees. Like, big fan. I think we need to add more ways of teaching people, but I absolutely think that colleges and universities are a critically important part of that ecosystem.
It's kind of you to say. I mean, obviously we need to change what we do as well. And partly that's about expanding the reach, the form of the learning, the different, outputs, whether it's, degrees, certificates, other credentials, or even not credentials at all, but, knowledge, learning, skills, when and where you need them, I think is important.
And that's, I think you touched on something. It's how do you make it accessible to more and more people, and how do you adapt based on what, a lot of employers are having? Are there components of the curriculum that maybe could get added to or kind of reimagined, or are there different, certifications? Because I think that's where it's more, how can we create more access and opportunity?
For sure. So then turning it around then back to the company side, how do you recruit great talent remotely, right? I mean, things look a little different now than they did.
What's amazing about this is I think that we recruit better now that we're remote. And sure, there's a cool factor that is getting to our campus and really getting a feel and a vibe for our culture. I think that is something we do miss. But what we found, especially in this moment, is that it's actually gives us far more reach, and we can go faster. And so what I mean by that is, if I don't need to wait for somebody to fly to one of our offices to meet with people in person, and then I need to find a day where a series of interviewers are available in a cadence, I can actually, not just the whole team, we can interview more people in a way that's also more equitable for them, because they don't need to get, childcare coverage if they have kids. They don't need to even if they're getting reimbursed for a flight. Sometimes people were like, well, I had to put it on my card before I got the reimbursement, and that was hard. And, if somebody's got, especially if, depending on where they are, either in school, recently out of school, if they've got, let's say, an hourly role, they got to take unpaid time off in some instances. And so the more that we've actually adapted to this remote environment, I think that it's enabled us to access more talent, do it faster, and make it more equitable, which we've really loved. What we've been trying to think about as we think about what this looks like after the pandemic is, how do we make sure that people who are meeting us are getting a really good sense of who we are and our culture, when, it's a two-dimensional experience right now. Yeah. But I think that more we do it, is that's why the behavioral based interviewing has been really important to us, because it also reflects how we as individuals care deeply about our values and who we are as a collective team. I think is able to show up in those conversations. And I guess the final part that I think stands out to me for how we're thinking about recruiting, and it goes back to where we're just saying about, education and creating, different ways of skill building. And even as we think about adjacent talent in other organizations, as tech companies, we've got to stop fishing in the same pool. And so, trading, recruiting somebody from another tech company into your tech company, that's not actually more people in tech. And so thinking about how do we actually broaden who we're interviewing, so that we can actually create great future leaders that truly change the representation in our organizations broadly.
That's great. And I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning, which is that you were able to recruit for this one senior job, somebody actually from your own organization, which is wonderful. We know from a lot of research over many years, and we're going to wind up in a moment here, but we do know that interviews are a notoriously bad predictor of performance, and also notoriously bad predictor to the candidate of what it's actually like in that company. The best predictor for the company is a sample of the person's work, and for the individual, a chance to spend time there. So internships, which of course we do as many as we can, and more colleges are becoming very much about that. But I think also the behavioral side that you're talking about, when it gets to actual examples or representation of examples, is really important. And if you want to close with anything about that, but then of course, I want to keep you. But this is very interesting stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. One of the things, in a lot of our engineering roles, there's actually a test, and it's not a pass fail. It's more to see how you navigate through the
Right.
test.
Right.
And even, for one of the roles on my team that we're hiring for, we asked them to do a bit of a case study. And again, it's just to kind of feel for how they think, because you're right. And the reason why I laughed is we're thinking about adding in a tool that looks at interviewers' predictive quality of future success of an individual, so that we can then better enhance our interview process. Because let's say we have somebody who's consistently, not like we're getting to bring in individuals that are ultimately not successful, like how much of that is embedded in the interview process. That doesn't solve for those who might not make it through the interview process, but it helps us really hone on what matters, what determines success here. How do we make sure that we're delivering a high caliber interview process? But additionally, I think you're right, creating some of this, the more we advance on these behavioral based frameworks, as well as case studies, you get out of the, some of the worst interviews was well, I thought they were okay, but not sure if they were a culture fit. Why? Don't know.
This is a whole other great conversation that maybe we can engage in. I know I'm really interested in this stuff, as are many of us. And of course, the role of AI and all the rest of it. How do you do well and do good without inadvertently, messing things up for people or for the company? Really interesting. I just have to say thank you so much. This is just the beginnings of conversation I wish we could have. I do apologize for the few questions we didn't actually get to, but I'll let you have the last word, and then hand it back over to Katie. Lara, great pleasure having you with us this afternoon.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I haven't read the chat. I'm probably gonna make sure I take a minute to read the chat before we end. But thank you so much for having me. It was great to get to come back to Mason, even though it was virtual. It was a lovely conversation with you, Dean Peiperl, and I look forward to hopefully future conversations. And I wish you all the best of luck for the brave new world that's in front of us.
Thank you so much, Lara, and thank you, Dean Peiperl, for moderating our conversation today. Just want to take a moment to give you guys both a virtual round of applause. So we're so happy to have you both here today. Again, thank you for joining us for the Brown & Brown Distinguished Speaker Series, and thank you to our sponsor, Brown & Brown Insurance again. I hope you all have a great evening. Good night.